my apologies. I didn't introduce myself earlier. My name is Trevor Brisbane. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the minister here at River Valley. It's really good to see you today. Have you ever been in a moment where you had to make a decision that felt so consequential that you knew whatever you decided there and then was going to have a ripple effect for the rest of your life? Have you ever had to make the kind of decision that you knew was going to send you on a trajectory either this way or that way, depending on what you decided there and then? March 2015, I got accepted to the doctoral program at Claremont School of Theology in Southern California, and I was so excited. This was a dream come true for me. Now, my wife Marisol and I, we have 3 kids, and back in 2015, they were quite young. So this wasn't just about me moving to Southern California. This was about our family moving to Southern California. So Marisol and I had this conversation, and we decided it would make a whole lot of sense before we commit to uproot everyone from Oakville to Los Angeles. I should go down and meet with the faculty of the school, get a sense, is this the right fit for me professionally? But even more than that, we wanted to get a feel for the way life might be, feel for what neighborhood we might live in, what kind of a house we might rent, what kind of school our kids might go to. It was sort of like a pre-Brisbane invasion scouting trip. Marisol had to work, and with the kids, it was just me on this one. A couple days before I left, Marisol and I had one of those conversations that you have with your partner sometimes, where it felt weighty. And she said, Trevor, if this adventure is going to work, it has to work for our kids. And schools are a big part of their future. So we got to get that right, the kids' schools. I know she would never tell you this, and she probably wouldn't want me to say this, but she's not here this morning, so there's no way she's ever going to find out that I say this. Marisol is brilliant. Marisol is equally fluent in Spanish and French. And so very important to Marisol was that our kids continue in a French immersion education. So she arranged for me while I was down there to visit a lycée. Do you know what a lycée is? I had never heard of a lycée before. I had no idea what a lycée was. It was the first time I had ever heard that word. But she explained it to me. What a lycée is, it's essentially a French school, but that follows the curriculum laid out by the Ministry of Education in France. There's a lycée in almost every major city around the world, and it's like you could go to any lycée on any given day and know that they're teaching the exact same thing around the world. It's like a French education, like as French as a French education gets. So she arranged for me to visit the lycée in Pasadena. I pulled up this morning and wasn't that impressed. First impression was it was sort of like this old dingy building behind this church. It looked sort of like it might have had its heyday in the 1970s. Like it probably was a motel, and then 30 years ago they decided to retrofit it to become a school. There was a playground, but it was really small. Like it was an urban, small-scale playground. There were kids playing soccer, but they had to play soccer on the asphalt because there wasn't enough of a field. True story, there was a squirrel. Because it's Southern California, the cafeteria or the eating area was a bunch of picnic tables outside. You can eat outside all year round. And so kids would put their lunch bags on these racks outside by the picnic tables. And the squirrel, later found out the squirrel's name was Charlie, would go methodically and figured out how to go from lunch bag to lunch bag, opening them, taking what it wanted for its own lunch. I met some of the teachers. They seemed lovely. but they were always going for smoke breaks, which seemed really cliche. They didn't ever speak to me in English. I don't speak French. What I could tell, they seemed lovely. I did get from them that often Canadian kids who come down thinking that they'll just sort of transfer from Ontario French immersion to like a lycée struggle academically because it's like way more French. I wasn't feeling great about the school, to be honest with you. Wrapping up, and I'm like, okay, time to go. And right before I left, I had one more visit with the principal, Philippe. Philippe had a thick French accent, a really warm smile, and although he was probably in his 50s, he had one of those like tweed jackets that your grandfather would wear, and instantly he was just a likable guy. He invited me into the principal's office, which is always a little bit of a trigger for me. But as we talked, I shared with him some of my concerns about the facility and the lack of English and that kind of thing. And then in the middle of the conversation, he stopped and he said, sorry, I'm just noticing the time. It's just about lunch hour. Can I pour you a glass of wine? I promise. When the tour was over, I immediately got in the car and I called Marisol because she was so keen. Like, Trevor, how was it? How was it? Is this the school for us? I'm like, she said, well, tell me about it. What were the facilities like? I said, to be honest with you, I don't see the facilities at all inspiring our kids to learn. Like the facilities, they're pretty dingy, to be honest with you. He said, okay, well, we're not signing up for the facilities. How are the teachers? I said, well, they kind of smell like smoke, and I couldn't understand a word that they were saying, so I don't know. She said, okay, well, what about the academics? Like, well, they say Canadian kids suffer, so, I think it's going to be a hard go on our kids. She's like, oh, and you can hear just the energy come out from her voice. And I said, but having said all that, hon, I think this is the school for us. And she said, I don't get it. Why would you say that? And I couldn't say because they serve really good Merlot at lunch. So I had to resort to the only thing I had, which was, sometimes you just have a parental instinct about something. At the end of Matthew chapter 7, Jesus drops this truth bomb about life. There's a guy who's built his house on a foundation of rock. And then we're told that the storm kicks up and it's something fierce. It's one of those storms where it feels like every force of the universe is against you, where the wind is howling, the rain's coming in sideways, but he's okay. The house stands because it was built on the rock. But then there's this other guy who chooses his kid's school based on a lunchtime glass of wine. Because when we choose to build our future on sand, Jesus says it very rarely goes well. Our kids did go to the lycée for a year, and then we made another decision. You used to be able to build a church on the personality of a leader. You used to be able to build a church. People would just come if you had a really nice facility. You used to be able to build a church by having really fancy music. And all around us, those churches are starting to fall in the storm. Because it was never what the church was intended to be built upon. In the same way, Jesus embodies the divine dream for the world. Together, Humber Valley United Church is seeking to be a living expression of justice, compassion, and belonging, now and into our future. We're calling this our North Star. We don't intend it to be a mission statement or a vision statement as much as a directional commitment. What we want to build our future upon. A rock, solid ground, on the only foundation that we should ever build a church upon. Jesus. The way of Jesus. is justice, compassion, belonging. 2 weeks ago, we talked about this way of Jesus. Last week, we talked about justice. So this morning, let's talk about compassion. Right after Jesus does this bit, has this teaching about which foundation we build our lives upon, at the end of Matthew chapter 7, the next two chapters are Matthew chapter 8 and 9, and they're both dripping with Jesus demonstrating empathy and compassion every chance he gets. So chapter 8 starts with Jesus coming down off the mount. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus comes off the mountain, and instantly a man with leprosy, Matthew chapter 8, verse 1, comes and kneels before him. Now remember, leprosy in the first century was like an instant way to become an outcast. No one wanted you around if you had leprosy. It was a little bit like those early days of COVID-19. If somebody had it, it was like you would banish them to the basement, or you would send them to a hotel or whatever. Just like you don't want them anywhere near you. They set up leper colonies in the first century. You were terrified of anyone with leprosy. You were detested if you had leprosy because your body was slowly deteriorating toward death. Matthew chapter 8:3, Jesus reached out and touched the man. Immediately, he was cleansed of his leprosy. See, Jesus doesn't just toss healing in that guy's direction. He doesn't just say, here, have some healing and haul it over. But he reaches out and he touches the untouchable. He does the very thing that required the most compassion. What foundation should you build your life upon? One where you touch the untouchable, love the unlovable, care about those nobody else cares about. The foundation of compassion. The very next scene is Jesus healing a Roman soldier's servant. Roman soldiers, they're the oppressor, the occupier. Jesus shows empathy. The very next scene is Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law who has a fever. Then Jesus delivers a bunch of people who Matthew says are demon-possessed. We'll circle back to that one in a few minutes. Then starting chapter 9, he heals a paralyzed man, and he doesn't just heal him, but this man is riddled with guilt and shame, so Jesus speaks forgiveness and grace into his life, oozes compassion. Jesus raises a dead girl, he heals a sick woman, and it goes on and on and on. Don't build your house on the sand, Jesus says. Build it on a rock. And everything that flows from that moment on demonstrates what the rock looks like. Jesus-like compassion. In the same way, Jesus embodies the divine dream for the world. Together, Humber Valley United Church is seeking to be a living expression of justice, compassion, and belonging, now and into the future. Let me make 3 quick observations about compassion. First, compassion always begins with an intentional proximity to pain. As soon as I say that, you might be thinking intentional proximity to pain. Like intentionally get closer to hurt. Trev, I come to church to try and escape my pain. I'm here because I've already got too much pain in my world. I'm here looking for you to tell me how to get rid of pain. I hate feeling the loneliness, or I want to move away from the addiction, or I don't want to feel this struggle anymore. I want less pain in my life. I don't want to hold on to my pain, let alone other people's problems. I would say this past week was painful for a lot of people. On Wednesday, protests were held all over the country in a coordinated expression of transphobia, trans hate, and just disdain for all things rainbow. The chant was "Protect Our Kids." At that point, they weren't even trying to hide it. Keep the trans, non-binary, queer experience out of public schools. The whole protest was about some parents not wanting their kids to be informed of the lived experience and struggles of other kids, or maybe even their own child's internal reality. I say this with no satisfaction and no hyperbole, but I can't think of too many postures in this world that are more anti-Christ. So have nothing to do with the way and heart of Jesus than saying we're opposed to understanding and learning about the lived experience of other kids. That's what the protest was saying. And if you claim Jesus for your life, it should make you mad, because the moment the intention is keep your struggles, keep your challenge, keep your life, keep what you're going through away from me and my kids, is the moment we've crucified Christ for our own comfort. You know what happens when you refuse proximity to somebody else's pain? You politicize it. You politicize their struggle. That's not my experience. I'm going to protest it. I'm not sick. Why should my tax dollars have to pay for their health care? Why don't they just take their problems back to their country? Let's build a wall, keep them out. We don't want them and their issues here. Literally, there's nothing more antithetical to the message in the heart of Jesus. John's about to tell us his gospel, the good news of Jesus. And he starts in the very first chapter, he says, look, before I really tell you who Jesus is and what Jesus is about, you need to know something. God became flesh and made God's dwelling among us. God refuses to stay away from the struggles and the mess and the heartbreak of humanity, but enters into it. Philippians chapter 2 goes like this. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. The heart of God is not to avoid the struggles of the world, but to step into them and embody love. This summer, the board and staff here at Humber Valley read a book together. Some of us loved it, some of us struggled with it. I would say everyone should read it. It's one of these books, has good parts that you take it for what it is, but I think it helps paint a picture of what it means to follow Jesus. It's by a guy named Shane Claiborne, called The Irresistible Revolution. And I love how he says it. He says, the problem is not that Christians don't care about the poor. The problem is that we don't know any poor people. Because when you know someone who's poor, when you care about someone who's poor, when they're part of your life, when they're part of your circle, poverty isn't just a political problem to be debated. It's personal. It's I care about you. How many emails have I gotten in the last 10 years from parents of kids who've come out? And they'll say, Trevor, can you help me understand how to rethink my Christianity so it doesn't work against my kid? Because once you're a parent and your child comes out, no longer is it just an issue that is politicized. It's your heart, and you never want to do harm to your child. When we know someone, when we're close to someone, when we care about them, compassion just comes naturally. So the way of Jesus propels us in the direction of the hurting and the poor and the brokenhearted. If you find that your Christianity leaves you asking, or what is it that I like, or what is it that I prefer, or what makes me comfortable, rather than asking where's the pain and suffering that I need to see, I suggest that that's a Christianity that's built on sin. It will not bear the weight of the world. Jesus says compassion is the law. So compassion is intentional proximity to pain. It's also a perception of powers. One of the things that happens over and over again in Matthew chapter 8 and 9 is Jesus heals people who are sick, but he also frees people who are demon-possessed. Awkward, right? As soon as you say, okay, are we going to talk about demon possession? My guess is the room split. My guess is there are some people in this room who have a worldview that allows space for demon possession. And there's probably others in this room who are like, no, I'm modern, and I just don't have a category for that. Good news, we're not going to pick a side this morning. We're going to find common ground. That's what we do here at Underdog. Find common ground. Whether you believe in demons or not, what Matthew 8 and 9 remind us of is, regardless of what you think about demons, is that there are always forces of evil at work in this world that are bigger than us. There are always forces at work in this world that are bigger than us. The Apostle Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 6. He says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil. Our house in Bloor West is right across from this little parkette. And one of the things we're noticing as a family is we're having more and more neighbors who are sleeping and living in the park. So our family are beginning to have bigger conversations and asking different kind of questions about what it means to have neighbors who don't have a roof over their head. Questions like, if I take one of my roofless neighbors a warm coat that I no longer need, I can feel really good about myself, right? Because I've helped them. And that neighbor can feel really good about themselves because they now have a new to them coat that will keep them warmer at night. And that's great. We all feel good about that charitable exchange. We both walk away feeling good. Yet at the same time, has anything changed in a world that allows for some people to sleep in a park and others to have empty, spare bedrooms? Or maybe I decide that I'm going to go without a new shirt this month, and I'm going to buy one of my roofless neighbors new shoes because I notice that their shoes are falling apart. It'd be a nice gesture, right? It'd be the right thing to do. So I buy the shoes, unaware that those shoes come from a sweatshop in Bangladesh. They've been knit together by an enslaved child. I'm trying to be compassionate. I'm trying to do the right thing. But in doing so, I'm actually contributing to a greater evil and greater harm. I just don't see it. It's invisible to me. It's bigger than what I can see. It's not flesh and blood. It's another force or power. There are forces at play which perpetuate the enslavement of people, human beings, for my sneakers. There are forces at play which justify me having too many coats while others don't even have a home. Dr. Martin Luther King put it like this. I meant to put it on the screen, my apologies. But calling on the imagery of the story of the Good Samaritan, he says this: we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside. But one day we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It's coming to see that a system that produces beggars needs to be removed. Compassion cares when the system exploits some for the benefit of others. Compassion cares that the system is dehumanizing to some while privileging others. Compassion means we're willing to look beyond the apparent, see the uncomfortable forces causing suffering, the evil behind suffering, and then making the hard choices to actually do something about it. Compassion is about proximity to pain. Compassion is about perceiving the powers. And this one I'm quick with, guys, I promise. Compassion is never passing the plate. Went for a walk a few weeks ago, right before Labor Day, with a good friend. And I could tell he wasn't himself. I don't want to pry, but as we were walking, he started to open up a little bit. He said that as he was walking along right by our house, right at Bloor and Runnymede, as he was walking along, out of nowhere one evening, 6 p.m., somebody came up behind him and out of the blue just punched him in the back of the head. He was fine, but it was unsettling. And as he was telling me this story, instantly, I could feel my anxiety level starting to rise. Like, what? And I'm absolutely ashamed of this. But you know what my first thought was when he was telling me this story? Oh, you were probably on your phone, not paying attention. You probably had your ear pods in, so weren't aware of what was happening. My first instinct was to pass the blame for him getting hit on the back of the head back to him. You weren't doing something right, that's why this happened. My first instinct. And it makes perfect psychological sense why I would do that. Because as my anxiety was going up, all I could think about is, oh no, my wife Marisol and the kids, they literally walk that stretch every single day. To get groceries, to go to the bakery, to go to the tutors, like literally every day my kids are walking. I needed to find a reason to make my friend responsible because I couldn't live with the anxiety that I was feeling that this could happen to a Brisbane. So I made him, in my head, hold the blame. You ever do that? We all do. We blame and give rationale for why other people are suffering. We desperately rationalize the reason why it happened to them because we don't want it to happen to us. How often do we see someone who needs our compassion and our default is to blame and scapegoat them? We accuse them of somehow being the problem, rather than seeing the person in their pain who might need genuine care. We categorize suffering people as the problem. All problems don't require compassion, but all people with problems do. Friends, our job is never to evaluate whether someone deserves the pain they're holding or is responsible for it. Our call, our job, our foundation is Jesus-like compassion. So in the same way, Jesus embodies the divine dream for the world. Together, Humber Valley United Church is seeking to be a living expression of justice and compassion and belonging, now and into our future. And it's not easy. It's beautiful, but it's not easy. Which is why we're a community. Which is why we gather together every week. To remind each other who we are. The ones doing our best to build a future on rock. And the rock's name is Jesus. This is my